It was supposed to be a night of laughter. 2 kids, popcorn, and a drive-in movie under the Arizona stars. But when the credits rolled in 1964, Tommy and Lila Whitlow never came home. Their disappearance tore through America. A perfect family turned national headline. A quiet desert town branded with a single word: mystery. For 60 years, the case lay buried until the drought came and the desert started giving back what it had hidden. What investigators found in that dust wasn't just the remains of 2 children. It was the truth about everyone who tried to forget them. 2 kids vanished. A family's arrest shocked a nation. And 6 decades later, the desert finally decided to talk. If stories like this keep you up at night, hit subscribe. And stay with us. August 14th, 1964. Hollow Creek, Arizona. The air smelled of rain that would never fall. At 8:37 p.m., the Whitlow family's Chevy Impala pulled away from the town's drive-in theater. Inside were David Whitlow, a highway engineer, his wife Ruth, and their 2 children, Tommy, age 9, and Lila, age 7. They'd watched The Pink Panther. Locals would later remember the laughter of 2 small voices echoing through the gravel lot, the beam of headlights fading toward the desert road that led home. They never arrived. By dawn, the search began. Neighbors, deputies, even the pastor combing through mesquite and stone. They found tire tracks veering off the dirt road, ending at a dry arroyo. No crash, no debris, only the faint smell of gasoline and 1 white ribbon snagged on a bush. Sheriff Ray Collier, new to the job and already weary from the heat, stood at the edge of the ravine. "Could be they wandered," he muttered. "No," said Ruth's sister, eyes wide and red. Ruth wouldn't leave her kids. 3 days later, the Impala was found 5 miles north. Abandoned, doors open, radio still on, its battery long dead. Inside, Ruth's purse, David's work badge, and 2 melted crayons on the dashboard. But no sign of the children. The nation watched as Hollow Creek became a wound. Newspapers called it the Dust Children case. Families locked doors. Reporters swarmed. The Whitlows were questioned, suspected, pitied. Then, in late September, David and Ruth were arrested on suspicion of murder, shocking the entire country. The evidence was circumstantial, the motive unclear. But public fury demanded answers, and in 1965, the trial began. Ruth cried through every hearing. David stared straight ahead, hands folded, eyes hollow. Both were acquitted due to lack of evidence, but the verdict didn't matter. Hollow Creek turned its back. Within a year, they'd moved away, and the desert reclaimed the memory. For 57 years, the story slept, until the drought came, and the dust began to give back what it had hidden. June 2021. The sun had already begun to blister the asphalt when forensic technician Ellen Moore stepped out of the county truck. She adjusted her sunglasses, squinting toward the wide, flat stretch of cracked earth that was once the basin of Lake Inferno. The water was gone. 6 decades of drought had turned it into a graveyard of forgotten things. "Right over there, ma'am," said the ranger, pointing. "Survey team found it yesterday. Thought it was just trash till they saw the bone." Ellen walked slowly, the crunch of her boots echoing in the silence. A hot wind scraped the surface of the ground. Half buried under a thin crust of silt was a small leather shoe, size 6. The laces had fused into brittle strings, the sole curling inward. Beside it, a fragment of blue fabric, patterned faintly with cartoon stars. She knelt. "Get me a perimeter," she said. The junior officer nodded, marking the grid. When the first photographs were taken, Ellen brushed the dust from the side of the shoe and saw the initials TWO faintly inked inside. That afternoon, the lab would confirm what Hollow Creek hadn't said aloud in decades: Tommy Whitlow. By sunset, the story had already hit local radio. Possible link to 1964 disappearance, the anchor said. Old-timers phoned in, voices shaking. The Dust Children weren't just a local legend anymore. They were evidence. Deputy Chief Morales arrived at dusk, his face lined, his shirt dark with sweat. "You think we'll find the rest?" Ellen didn't look up. "We're already standing on it." By nightfall, floodlights cast long white beams over the cracked earth. Ground-penetrating radar picked up metallic anomalies 2 feet below surface, elongated hollow shapes. When the dig team broke through the crust, the smell of dry rust and old gasoline filled the air. A corroded frame emerged, coated in powdery dust, the roof of a car. "Old Chevy," Morales murmured, kneeling. "Early 60s. They worked through the night. By 2 a.m., the Impala's full skeleton gleamed under the floodlight, doors half torn, interior mummified. Ellen climbed inside, camera flashing. On the passenger seat lay a cracked glass bottle of Coca-Cola, its logo faded but legible. The glove compartment was rusted shut. She pried it open with a screwdriver. Inside, folded twice, was a small paper receipt. Hollow Creek Drive-In, August 14th, 1964. Family pass, 2 adults, 2 children. Ellen stared at the paper, dust trembling in her hand. "After 57 years, she whispered. They came home. By sunrise, the desert looked unchanged, pale, infinite, indifferent. But to Hollow Creek, the past had just clawed its way to the surface. By the time the morning sun reached Main Street, Hollow Creek was already awake. News vans lined the single road that split the town in half, their satellite dishes pointed at a sky that hadn't seen clouds in weeks. The sign above the diner, Ethel's Cafe, since 1959, flickered in the heat. Inside, the regulars pretended not to look at the television. A local reporter's voice echoed from the screen. "Authorities have confirmed that skeletal remains found near Lake Inferno are consistent with the 1964 Whitlow disappearance. For those too young to remember, Tommy and Lila Whitlow vanished on their way home from the drive-in nearly 6 decades ago. Their parents were briefly arrested and later released, but the case remained unsolved until now." No one spoke. The clink of coffee cups and the low hum of the refrigerator filled the silence. At the counter, Ruth Whitlow's niece, Karen Delaney, stared at the screen. She was 71 now, a retired nurse with tired eyes and a voice that rarely rose above a whisper. "I told them," she murmured. "All those years ago, I told them the desert would give them back." The waitress refilled her coffee, glancing toward the window where the first black SUVs from the state crime unit rolled by. Out by the basin, Ellen Moore hadn't slept. The site was now sealed under a wide canopy, a patchwork of white tents and cables. Forensic teams sifted through dust with soft brushes, revealing fragments of metal, bits of cloth, bones curled like question marks. The Impala was lifted in parts, catalogued piece by piece. The air carried the sour scent of age and fuel. "Front seat was empty," said Morales, kneeling beside Ellen. "Back seats were the evidence points. Child fibers, a bracelet charm, and residue. No bodies. The car was staged to look like a tomb, one leaning against the other. The remains told a quiet story. A child's protective posture, fingers curled around the other's wrist." "Cause of death?" Morales asked. "Too soon," Ellen said, voice low. "Could be carbon monoxide. Could be something else. But this wasn't an accident." She bagged a rusted keychain shaped like a star. Faint engraving, L.W., Lila Whitlow. That afternoon in Phoenix, Detective Laura Bennett received the call. She'd been a child when she first saw the Whitlow case on a rerun of America's Most Wanted. Now, 20 years into her career, she was known for reopening cold files that no one else wanted. When she reached the site that evening, Ellen met her by the tape line. "Laura Bennett," Ellen said, shaking her hand. "I've heard of you. Good things, I hope. Depends on who you ask." Laura studied the basin, the hollow pit glowing orange under sunset light, the dry hills beyond it, silent and endless. "Feels like walking into the past," she said. Ellen nodded. "And the past is loud here." They walked toward the excavation pit. A breeze lifted dust from the cracked ground, making it shimmer. The children's remains had already been moved to the coroner's lab in Flagstaff, but the car still sat under the lights, a steel ghost. "Two kids vanish. Car found half a century later," Laura said. "But where are the parents?" "Both dead," Ellen replied. "Ruth in 92, David in 84. Cancer took them. No children after the disappearances. Their niece is still around, Karen Delaney. Good. I'll start there." Karen lived in a small stucco house at the edge of town, a line of rose bushes wilted from the heat. When Laura knocked, she opened the door before the second rap. "I knew you'd come," she said. "They always do, when something new turns up." Inside, the air smelled faintly of lavender and old paper. Framed photographs lined the wall, black and white family portraits, wedding pictures, a yellowed school photo of two smiling children in matching plaid. Tommy and Lila. Karen poured tea, her hands trembling slightly. "Aunt Ruth never stopped hoping," she said. "She wrote letters every year to the county office. I have them, if you want to see." Laura leaned forward. "Did she ever say who she thought took them?" Karen hesitated. "She did, but no one believed her." "Who?" Karen's eyes flicked toward the window, as if expecting someone outside. "Her husband. My Uncle David." Laura stayed still. The clock on the wall ticked softly. "She accused him?" "She didn't say it out loud," Karen said. "Not to the police. But she wrote it in her letters. Said he'd been different that summer. Working long hours, coming home smelling of engine oil and whiskey. The night the kids disappeared, she said he left the house after midnight. Came back at dawn with dust on his boots, and she stayed with him? For a while. After the trial, she said she forgave him. But she never slept in the same bed again." Laura's pen scratched quietly against her notebook. "What about the rest of the town? Anyone still around who might know more?" Karen nodded toward a photograph on the wall. A man in a deputy's uniform, young and confident. "Sheriff Collier's boy. He runs the scrapyard now. His father kept files they never turned over to the state. Maybe you'll find what they didn't want seen." That night, as Laura drove back through Hollow Creek, the headlights swept across the ruins of the old drive-in. The screen still stood, a pale rectangle against the stars, its surface cracked and flaking. She parked, stepped out, and listened. The wind moved through the dry grass with a sound like whispering. Somewhere in the distance, a coyote called. Laura looked toward the desert's edge, where floodlights still glowed faintly over the dig site. "Two kids," she murmured, "and a town that buried them." She didn't yet know that the truth she was chasing wasn't in the sand. It was in the people who'd never left, and Hollow Creek wasn't done keeping its secrets. The scrapyard lay on the northern edge of Hollow Creek, a sprawl of twisted metal and heat shimmer. Rusted frames leaned against one another like relics of forgotten wars. Laura Bennett pulled her unmarked sedan through the gate. A hand-painted sign read, "Collier and Son Salvage, established 1978. A tall man emerged from behind a stack of fenders, wiping grease from his hands with a rag. Late 60s, lean, a weathered face that still carried traces of the boy he'd once been. "You must be the detective," he said. "I'm Mark Collier. My dad was sheriff back then. Appreciate you taking the time. Hard to ignore when the news keeps replaying your dig site on every channel." They shook hands. His grip was strong, reluctant. "I heard you might have some of your father's files," Laura said. "Anything connected to the Whitlow case?" Mark nodded slowly. "Come on, it's in the office inside." The air smelled of oil and sun-baked paper. A fan rotated lazily above a desk littered with invoices. Against the back wall stood a metal cabinet. Mark unlocked it, tugged open a drawer, and pulled out a cardboard box labeled 1964. Whitlow. He set it on the desk. Dust puffed into the air. He kept this when the county switched to microfilm in the 70s. Said some things weren't meant to disappear into machines. Laura pulled on gloves, lifting the lid. Inside were brittle folders, Polaroids, carbon copy reports, and a leather notebook. She opened the first file. Vehicle recovery, August 17, 1964. Photos showed the Impala as it had first been found, intact, half buried in sand near the arroyo. But the angle was wrong. The car faced north in the picture. The car unearthed at Lake Inferno had been facing south. "Your father logged this as the crash site?" she asked. "Yeah," Mark said. "But that's not where you folks found it, is it?" "No," Laura replied. "Not even close. 20 miles apart." She flipped through the pages. The sheriff's notes described 2 separate search locations. The first ended abruptly, replaced by a typed report signed only by a county official from Phoenix. Case redirected to state jurisdiction. Do not pursue further local investigation. Laura frowned. He was pulled off the case. Mark leaned against the desk. "Dad always said the county didn't want more scandal. 2 kids missing, parents accused, townsfolk on edge. Then some state suit came down and told him to let it go." "Did he?" Mark smiled faintly. "He said he did." Laura lifted the small leather notebook from the box. The cover was cracked. Initials RC burned into the corner. She turned the pages carefully. The handwriting slanted sharply, quick and agitated. August 19th. Ruth Whitlow came to see me again. Said she heard an engine in the middle of the night after the movie. Claimed David left bed around midnight. Said he was checking a noise in the yard. Told her to go back to sleep. She swears she heard children whispering outside. I think she's breaking down. August 22nd. Found shoe print near Arroyo. Small. Not a man's. Tire tracks nearby. Same make as Whitlow's Impala. Someone moved that car. Laura looked up. He knew the scene had been staged. Mark nodded. He told me once, before he died. Said he'd seen something in that arroyo he couldn't unsee. When he tried to file it, the report vanished. Do you know what he found? Mark hesitated. He said there were 2 sets of footprints, 1 adult, 1 child, and that the smaller ones stopped at the waterline. The larger ones kept going. Toward where? Toward the Whitlow house. Later that afternoon, Laura sat in her motel room, the notebook open on the bed. Outside, cicadas screamed in the heat. She traced the last entry. September 2nd. I'm being told to close it, but something's wrong with the timeline. The Impala couldn't have been in that arroyo on the 15th. It rained that night, and the ground was clean the next morning. Someone moved the car after the storm. She replayed the evidence in her head. The car found decades later in a dried lake, turned the opposite direction, bodies in the back seat. It wasn't a crash. It was disposal. Laura pulled her phone, dialing Ellen Moore. Yeah? Ellen's voice was hoarse from lack of sleep. Ellen, I'm looking at old reports. The car was moved, staged, maybe days after the disappearance. We need to check for trace sediment under the chassis, something waterborne. The ground where we found it might not have been the first resting place. I'll run samples, Ellen said. If there's lake silt instead of desert dust, we'll know. Good. And one more thing, Laura added. There's mention of tire tracks near the Whitlow property. You still have access to aerial archives? County Survey Office. I'll pull them. Do that. Something tells me this didn't end with the Whitlows that evening. She drove to the old Whitlow property, now an overgrown lot behind a line of mesquite trees. The house was long gone, burned down in the 80s. Only the stone foundation remained, half hidden under grass. The wind rose, carrying the dry scent of creosote. Somewhere, a door hinge squealed from a rusted shed. Laura stepped closer, flashlight cutting through the dusk. Inside the shed, everything was still. Tools rusted to the walls, a cracked mirror leaning against the corner. Beneath it, she noticed a loose floorboard. She pried it up. A small tin box sat in the hollow. Inside, a child's drawing. 2 stick figures holding hands beside a square labeled Home. In the corner, written in shaky pencil, "Don't tell Daddy." Laura felt the air leave her chest. She folded the paper back into the box and closed it carefully. When she stepped out into the dark, the desert felt watchful, like it had been waiting for her to find it. Somewhere behind her, thunder rolled, far off, promising rain that never came. The morning after the storm that never came, the desert smelled faintly of metal and dust. Laura Bennett sat at a diner booth near the window, her notebook open, half a cup of coffee gone cold beside it. Ellen Moore's voice came through the phone, rough but electric. "You were right, Laura. We ran microsediment analysis from under the Impala's frame. There's lakebed clay mixed with oxidized metal, same type found near Inferno Reservoir. That car didn't die in the arroyo. It was submerged." Laura leaned back, watching the pale horizon. "So someone moved it after the rain, just like Collier wrote. And get this, both rear door locks were forced from the outside. Someone wanted those kids inside and staying put." Laura exhaled slowly. "You just changed everything." She drove to the county records office, a squat building whose air conditioning sounded older than the walls. In a back room lined with gray filing cabinets, a clerk slid a stack of black and white aerial photographs onto the counter. "These are from the Bureau of Reclamation, mid-60s, the clerk said. They were documenting the expansion of Inferno Reservoir. Laura sifted through them. In one photo dated August 20th, 1964, a faint dirt track snaked from the main road to the northern rim of the reservoir, ending abruptly near what looked like a shallow dock. Another photo, taken a week later, showed fresh tire marks and what might have been a set of footprints leading toward the water. She took both photos, pressing them into her folder. On her way out, the clerk called after her, "Detective." "There's something else. An old reclamation foreman came by a few days ago. Said he'd seen the news and remembered something from back then. He lives out past mile marker 19. The trailer sat in the middle of nowhere, surrounded by the skeletons of rusted tractors and broken water tanks. The man who opened the door was thin and gray, his eyes the pale blue of desert glass. "Mr. Callahan?" Laura asked. He nodded once. "You're here about them kids?" "I am." He motioned her inside. The air smelled of tobacco and kerosene. Maps of the reservoir and surrounding basins covered one wall. "I was a foreman for the Reclamation Bureau in '64, he said, settling into a worn armchair. "Back then, the water line was still creeping outward. I used to patrol nights to make sure no one trespassed." Laura took out her recorder. "You remember the night they vanished?" Callahan looked out the window, eyes distant. "August 14th. Hot as hell. I was driving the ridge road around midnight when I saw headlights down by the water. Thought it was fishermen. But then..." He stopped, frowning. "Then I heard a scream." "What kind of scream?" "A child's. Short, sharp, then cut off." Laura's pen froze. "Did you report it?" "Went down there next morning," he said. "Found fresh tire ruts. The car tracks led into the shallows. Figured someone got stuck and towed out. Didn't think much till I heard on the radio about those missing kids." "Did you tell the sheriff?" "I did. Came up to town, told Collier myself. He took notes, thanked me. But next week, he came back saying the state took over. Told me not to talk about it again." Laura nodded slowly. "Do you remember the make of the car?" "Hard to see from up the ridge. Looked like a Chevy, light color, and there was another vehicle too. Dark pickup, parked back near the road." She leaned forward. "You sure?" He looked at her sharply. "I may be old, but I ain't blind." "There was a pickup. Driver left his lights off." When Laura left the trailer, the wind had risen again, hot and sharp. She stood by her car, looking out at the flat horizon where the reservoir shimmered faintly in the distance. A second vehicle, a witness who'd been told to stay silent. Someone had helped move that car. She drove straight to the sheriff's office, now run by a younger man named Deputy Chief Morales, the same one from the dig site. He met her in his cluttered office, brow furrowed. "You look like you've seen a ghost," he said. "I think I just met one," Laura replied, handing him the aerial photos. Inferno Reservoir was still filling in August '64, but look, fresh tire marks by the dock, a week apart. The Impala wasn't dumped once, it was moved twice. Morales scanned the images, jaw tightening. By who? Callahan saw a second vehicle. A pickup, probably the same one that towed the Impala from the Arroyo. The question is who had access to a tow in 1964 Hollow Creek. Morales opened a cabinet, pulling out an old ledger. Only 3 towing companies registered that year. Hollow Creek Auto Repair, owned by George Merrill. Miller's Garage, now closed. And he hesitated. The County Road Department. Meaning, David Whitlow was a county engineer. He oversaw maintenance crews, including tow vehicles. Laura stared at the list, then up at him. So he had access to the exact kind of truck used to move his own car. Unless someone else did, Morales said quietly. That night, Laura returned to her motel, mind racing. She pinned the photos to the wall, drawing lines between them with red string. The timeline was shifting under her hands. August 14th, children vanish. August 15th, Impala missing. August 17th, car found in Arroyo. Staged. Late August, car moved to Reservoir. She circled the last date. Who had reason to bury it twice? She stared at the notebook from Sheriff Collier again. One phrase kept repeating in the margins, scribbled over and over in fading ink. The father wasn't alone. Sleep didn't come easily. When it did, it brought a dream. 2 children running through the desert, their laughter thin against the wind, a shadow following just out of sight. When she woke, the clock read 3:17 a.m. Outside, the desert was utterly still. A single headlight glowed faintly near the edge of the parking lot, then disappeared. Laura stood at the window, heart hammering. Someone was watching. Morning rose pale and silent over Hollow Creek. A layer of dust coated the motel windows, muting the sun into a dull orange disk. Laura Bennett sat on the edge of the bed, the notebook open across her knees. The words from Collier's journal still burned behind her eyes. The father wasn't alone. The phrase had no context, no name, no hint of who the other person was, only the weight of implication. Her phone buzzed. Ellen Moore. "Got your trace analysis?" Ellen said. "Under the Impala's floor mats, we found 2 distinct soil samples. One desert clay, expected. The other's topsoil rich in decayed vegetation. Not from the lake basin, meaning. It came from someone's yard, maybe a garden or a patch near trees. There's no vegetation for miles out there." Laura glanced at the aerial map on the table, tracing her finger along the dirt road between the Whitlow house and the Arroyo. One house sat halfway between, the neighbor's property. The Merrills had lived next door to the Whitlows in 1964. The husband, George Merrill, had been a mechanic at Hollow Creek Auto. His wife, Irene, a seamstress. They'd moved away in the late 70s after Irene's nervous breakdown. Laura located their address in the old tax records, now just a sagging house at the edge of town, windows boarded, a for sale sign crooked in the yard. She parked in the gravel drive, the wind whispering through dry mesquite. The door hung ajar. Inside smelled of cedar and thyme. Dust floated in sunbeams that cut through the broken boards. The living room still held faded wallpaper patterned with lilies. On a side table sat a photograph of 2 couples, David and Ruth Whitlow, standing beside George and Irene Merrill, arms around each other, smiling into the sun. Laura studied it. The men shared a look, brotherly, conspiratorial. She moved deeper inside, boots creaking on warped wood. In the kitchen, she found boxes of old receipts, pay stubs, and one yellow envelope marked Sheriff, returned 1965. She tore it open carefully. Inside lay a typed witness statement. Name: Irene Merrill. Date: August 20th, 1964. Statement: I heard shouting from next door the night the Whitlow children disappeared. Around 11 p.m. I saw David's truck leave the driveway. A few minutes later, Ruth came out in her nightgown, crying. She called after him. The light stayed on all night. When I looked again near dawn, the truck was back, but the house was dark. At the bottom was a note in blue ink. Statement withdrawn at witness's request. Mental instability. No further action. Laura closed her eyes, the paper trembling slightly in her hand. Mental instability, the old euphemism for inconvenient truth. She slipped the statement into her folder and took one last look around. On the windowsill above the sink, she noticed something carved faintly into the wood. 2 initials, joined by a heart. DW+IM. She traced the letters with her thumb. David Whitlow and Irene Merrill, she whispered. By noon, Laura was back at the sheriff's office. Morales looked up from his desk as she dropped the file onto it. Irene Merrill, she said. The neighbor. She gave a statement that vanished. He opened the folder, reading quickly. This was never logged in the county archive. Collier's notes hinted at a second adult involved, Laura continued. And the car was moved twice. What if it wasn't David acting alone? What if he had help, and that help came from right next door? Morales leaned back, rubbing his temples. You think she was involved in the disappearance? I think she knew something she couldn't live with, Laura said. The initials carved in her kitchen window, DW+IM. They had an affair. Maybe Ruth found out. Maybe that night the argument started over the kids being leveraged. Morales frowned. That's speculation. So is every cold case until someone proves otherwise, she said quietly. Find me Irene Merrill's medical records. I want to know where she ended up. That evening, the record came through. Irene Merrill, deceased 1998. Cause of death: complications from dementia at Sierra Pines Convalescent Home, Prescott. But beneath the main entry was a small note. Personal effects held by next of kin. Douglas Merrill, son. Laura called the number listed in the file. After several rings, a man answered, his voice hoarse and wary. Mr. Merrill? This is Detective Bennett with Hollow Creek PD. I'm looking into your parents' old property. A pause. The Whitlow case? Yes, he sighed. I figured someone would come eventually. I kept her things. Didn't have the heart to throw them out. Could we meet? Sure, he said after a moment. But not in town. Some folks still don't like hearing that name. They met at a rest stop off Highway 17, the desert stretching infinite behind the wire fence. Douglas Merrill was in his late 60s, broad-shouldered, with deep lines around his eyes. He carried a small wooden box. She used to keep letters in here, he said, setting it on the picnic table. Mostly nonsense, you know. Grocery lists, prayers, scraps. But a few weren't meant for me. Laura opened the box. Inside were folded pages tied with a ribbon, the paper yellowed and thin. She untied the string and began reading. August 23rd, 1964. David says it was an accident. He swore he only meant to scare Ruth, make her see what would happen if she left. The children were supposed to sleep, but Lila woke up. She saw us by the car. She screamed. Laura's pulse quickened. The next page was smeared with ink where tears had fallen. He said we had to hide it. Said no one would understand. I wanted to tell, but he took the truck before I could. He said he'd make it look like they drowned. I begged him to stop. He said it was too late. The last letter was undated, scrawled in a shaking hand. The truth is still out there, buried where the water used to be. If anyone finds this, forgive me. I was weak. Laura lowered the page, the desert humming with cicadas. So, Douglas said quietly, you found what you needed? She nodded. More than I hoped for. Less than I wanted back in her car. The sun dipped behind the mountains, bleeding red across the sky. Laura sat for a long moment, staring at the letters spread across the passenger seat. Irene had tried to confess, but someone had buried her story just like the car, layer after layer of silence. She turned on the ignition, gravel crunching under the tires as she headed back toward Hollow Creek. Somewhere out there, beneath the dust and the dry lake bed, the rest of the truth waited. And now, Laura knew whose hands had put it there. By dusk, the sun had collapsed into a smear of red behind the mesas. The wind carried the smell of dust and metal, the scent of something too old to die. Detective Laura Bennett parked at the edge of the excavation zone, floodlights humming in the distance. The basin spread before her like the hollow of a great wound. She could see the outlines of white tents, the skeletal frame of the Impala under tarps, and the figures of techs moving like ghosts. Ellen Moore spotted her and waved. "You shouldn't be here this late," she called out. "Neither should you," Laura replied, stepping over the caution tape. Ellen smirked faintly. "Fair. What brings you out?" Laura held up a folder. Letters. From Irene Merrill. She confessed that the kids didn't drown by accident. Said the car was buried where the water used to be. "That's here." Ellen's expression shifted from fatigue to alarm. "You think there's more?" "Another site. Maybe not more bodies," Laura said quietly. "Maybe something he came back for." They walked toward the pit. Under the harsh floodlight, the Impala looked skeletal, its once blue paint corroded to a pale ghost of color. The back seat was empty now, tagged and photographed. But the earth beneath it was uneven, rippled as if disturbed. "I want a deeper dig," Laura said. 3 more feet." Ellen hesitated. "We already cleared the perimeter." "Not the floor," Laura said. "If Irene's letters are right, David came back here. We might find what he left." Ellen nodded reluctantly and radioed the crew. The work began under white light and silence. The wind died down completely, the air thick and dry. One of the technicians called out after 20 minutes. "Detective, metal reading, small object, east quadrant." Laura crouched beside him. He brushed away the dust until the edge of a rusted tin canister appeared. The lid had fused shut, but inside they could hear something rattling faintly. "Bag it," Ellen said, but Laura shook her head. "Not yet." She pried it open with a screwdriver. Inside was a roll of undeveloped film, sealed in wax paper. Ellen exhaled. "My God." "Get this to the lab," Laura said. "Handle it like it's made of glass." She sealed the canister herself, marking the label. "Found beneath vehicle, 3 feet depth." By the time they finished, it was nearly midnight. The crew packed up, leaving the basin in relative silence. Ellen climbed into her truck, promising to courier the film straight to Flagstaff first thing. Laura lingered. She stood at the edge of the pit, looking down at the outline of the car, at the desert around it, a vast, indifferent witness. She turned when she heard gravel shift behind her. A man stood by the floodlight pole, a silhouette in a wide-brim hat. The beam cut across his face just enough for her to see a lined mouth and pale eyes. "Detective Bennett?" he asked, voice low, uncertain. "Yes. I used to work the road department," he said. "Back in the 60s. Heard you're digging up the Whitlows. Who told you that?" "Everybody talks in a town like this." He stepped closer. "I worked under David." Knew him well, Laura studied his face. "Name?" "Carl Everett." She nodded. "All right, Mr. Everett. What do you want to tell me?" He looked toward the basin. "He wasn't the only one who came back here. I saw Ruth, too." Laura froze. "Ruth Whitlow?" His wife? He nodded. 2 weeks after the kids disappeared. I was patching road out by Inferna. Saw her car parked by the old dock. She was digging in the dirt, crying. Stayed there for hours. When she left, she looked like she'd seen the devil himself. What year was this? Same year, he said. 1964. Laura's pulse thudded. Did you tell anyone? He shook his head. You think anyone would have believed me? The sheriff already had orders to close it. What do you think she was digging for? Laura asked softly. He looked at her for a long time. Maybe she wasn't digging. Maybe she was burying something. At dawn, Laura drove back to town, the first light washing over the desert in shades of copper and bone. Sleep felt impossible. Her mind replayed Irene's letters, Everett's confession, and the tin canister beneath the car. She stopped at a gas station for coffee, staring absently at the reflection in the window. The tired woman looking back at her, sun-creased and restless. Her phone buzzed. Ellen again. Laura, you need to get here now. Flagstaff lab? Yes, they developed the film an hour later. Laura walked into the lab. Ellen was waiting in the viewing room, pale under fluorescent light. On the light table lay 6 photographs, glossy and ghostly. The first was of 2 children standing in front of a car, Tommy and Lila Whitlow. The second, the same car, parked near the reservoir dock. The third, darker, showed an adult figure in silhouette near the driver's side. Who took these? Laura whispered. Ellen's voice was quiet. Looks like Irene Merrill. Same make of film as her home camera we cataloged last night. Laura lifted the 4th photo. It showed the Impala half submerged, headlights still on. A woman stood knee-deep in water beside the decoy car, guiding it into the shallows. Her face barely visible but unmistakable. Ruth Whitlow. She was there, Laura said. She saw everything. Ellen's hand trembled as she slid the 5th photo under the lamp. It was almost black, but when magnified, a face appeared faintly in the glare of a flashlight. Male, jaw tense, eyes wide. David Whitlow. He was looking directly at the camera. The last frame showed nothing but rippled water and darkness, as if the photographer had dropped the camera mid-movement. Laura stared at the sequence, heart hammering. This changes everything. Irene documented it, all of it. Ruth wasn't innocent. She helped Ellen, nodded slowly. Maybe guilt drove her to dig years later. Or to silence anyone who knew, Laura said, her voice low, including Irene. The room was silent except for the faint hum of the light table. Laura looked at the last photo again, at the rippled water frozen in time. Something about the angle caught her eye, the reflection of a shape behind the light. Not desert, not trees, a structure. Can we enhance this? She asked. Ellen leaned over, adjusting the contrast on the monitor. The pixels brightened, outlines emerging. A wooden shack, a single door, half collapsed, but still there. Laura felt a chill run through her. That's not the Whitlow house, she murmured. That's something else. Ellen glanced at her. You know where that is? Laura nodded slowly. The old surveyor's hut by the reservoir. It's still standing. By the time she drove out to the hut, the sun had dipped again. The light was fading, the desert turning blue-gray. The structure stood alone against the horizon, its roof caved in, its walls bowed with age. She stepped inside. The air smelled of rust and something faintly sweet. Decayed flowers, maybe. A single chair lay overturned beside a small, dry well cut into the floor. Laura crouched beside it. Inside, half buried in sand, was a piece of fabric. She pulled it free, a child's dress, pale blue, patterned with faint stars. She stood in the doorway, the wind lifting dust around her. The world was utterly still. The truth was no longer buried. It was waiting. The next morning broke flat and colorless. The desert sky a sheet of pale ash. Laura Bennett stood at the doorway of the collapsed surveyor's hut, the child's blue dress folded carefully in her hand. The fabric was stiff with dust and age, but the pattern was unmistakable. Tiny stars, the same as the scrap they'd found beside the shoe at the basin. She sealed it in an evidence bag, labeling it Item 47, Reservoir Hut. Probable link, Lila Whitlow. The door groaned behind her as she stepped out. The wind had begun to rise again, pushing long streaks of sand across the cracked ground. In the distance, the basin shimmered under the sun, a vast bowl of secrets that refused to stay buried. By the time she returned to the sheriff's office, Morales was waiting in the hallway with a file in his hand. "You're not going to believe this," he said. "Try me." He handed her the file. "Ruth Whitlow's death certificate. You said she died of cancer in '92. That's what every public record says." Laura opened the folder. A grainy copy of the certificate sat inside. The cause of death line had been overwritten. Beneath the ink, a faint original entry remained visible under magnification. Accidental overdose. Morphine. Laura looked up sharply. "Someone altered this." "County coroner at the time was a man named Dr. Felix Harlan," Morales said. "Retired to New Mexico years ago, but the nurse who signed as witness is still alive. Name's Linda Voss. Lives 2 towns over." Laura grabbed her coat. "Get me her address." Linda Voss lived in a small adobe house on the outskirts of Mesa Verde. The garden was overgrown, the air heavy with the scent of sage. She opened the door slowly, leaning on a cane, her eyes sharp despite her age. "I know why you're here," she said before Laura could speak. "It's about Ruth." Laura nodded. "You were the nurse who attended her?" "Yes," Linda said. "She was already weak from the chemo, but she wasn't dying yet. That night, she asked for her pain shot early. I gave her the prescribed dose, went to make her tea, and when I came back, she was gone." "You think it was suicide?" Linda hesitated. "That's what the coroner said later. But it didn't feel that way. The syringe wasn't in the room. Neither was her locket." "Locket?" "She wore it every day. Said it was the last thing her daughter gave her." Laura's pulse quickened. "Did anyone come by that night? Family, friends?" "One man," Linda said. "Tall, maybe late 50s at the time. Said he was from the state archives, there to collect her written testimony for official storage." "Name?" "He never gave one. But after he left, I found the folder she'd kept under her bed. Gone." Laura's voice went low. "Did she tell you what was in it?" Linda nodded slowly. "She said it was the truth about the children. Everything the courts never wanted to hear." That afternoon, Laura sat in her car outside the old courthouse, rain clouds gathering over the desert, rare and heavy. She watched water darken the asphalt, tiny drops spreading like ink. Her phone buzzed. Ellen Moore. "We finished analyzing the fabric from the hut," Ellen said. "It's consistent with Lila's dress, no doubt. But here's the strange part. The sand embedded in the fibers isn't from the '60s layer. It's newer, maybe 10, 15 years old." Laura froze. "Someone moved it." "Yeah, after 2005 at least." Laura's mind spun. Ruth died in 1992. If the dress had been disturbed after that, someone else had come back to the site. Someone still alive. She opened the notebook again. Collier's scrawled phrase, "The father wasn't alone." Maybe he hadn't been the only one in 1964. Maybe he wasn't the last one afterward either. The next morning, Laura drove north to a small cemetery outside Sedona where Ruth Whitlow was buried. The gate was rusted, the sign crooked, letters flaking with age. Her headstone was modest. Beloved wife and mother. No mention of the children, no dates beyond the bare minimum. Fresh flowers lay at the base of the stone. Laura crouched. The stems were green, petals crisp. They'd been left within the past 2 days. She looked around the empty cemetery. "Who still visits you?" she whispered. Footsteps crunched behind her. She turned. An older man stood at the path's edge, holding a plastic watering can. His clothes were neat, his hair white. He hesitated when he saw her. "You knew Ruth?" Laura asked. He nodded. "Worked maintenance at the hospital. She was kind to me. Quiet woman. Did you leave these?" He shook his head. "No, ma'am. A man's been coming here every month or so. Always late evening. Drives an old truck, dark green. Doesn't stay long. Do you know his name?" "No, but—" The man frowned, thinking. "He walks with a limp. Right leg. Like it pains him." Laura's breath caught. Mark Collier, the sheriff's son. The one who'd given her his father's files. She remembered the way he'd stood in the scrapyard, favoring one leg. That evening, she returned to the scrapyard. The sun was setting, metal casting long shadows across the lot. Mark was there, as always, sorting through a pile of old mufflers. "Evening, detective," he said, without looking up. "You've been visiting Ruth Whitlow's grave," Laura said. He froze. "That a crime now?" "Depends on why." He set down the tool in his hand, wiped the sweat from his brow. "She didn't deserve what she got." "Meaning?" "My father broke her spirit," Mark said quietly. "He covered things he shouldn't have. He told me near the end, said he'd falsified her death report, changed the cause. Said he owed her that much." Laura stepped closer. "Why? What was he protecting?" Mark's gaze lifted to hers, eyes glinting. "Ruth told him something before she died. Said the truth would destroy more than one family. She begged him to keep it buried." "What truth?" He hesitated, then said softly, "That the night the children vanished, there was a third person at the house. Not David, not Ruth. Someone who'd come to collect the kids for a ride. Someone they trusted. Who?" Mark swallowed hard. "Ruth's brother." The name hit her like a drop of cold water. She flipped open her notes. Ruth's brother, John Delaney. The same man who disappeared a few years after the trial. Karen Delaney's father. Laura stood in the scrapyard's fading light, the truth crystallizing. The circle of guilt wasn't just the Whitlows and the Merrills. It reached into another family entirely. Ruth had tried to confess before she died. The coroner's cover-up, the missing folder, the man who took it, all of it was meant to protect someone else, and that someone had bloodline in Hollow Creek, still alive. Karen. As darkness fell, Laura started the car, the engine echoing through the metal maze. She didn't look back at Mark Collier, who watched her go with unreadable eyes. The wind had picked up again, scattering dust across the horizon. The past was awake now, and it wasn't finished speaking. Hollow Creek was already sinking into dusk when Laura Bennett pulled into Karen Delaney's driveway. The house looked unchanged from her first visit. White paint flaking, curtains drawn tight, roses wilted from heat. She sat for a moment, engine idling, thinking of Mark Collier's words. Ruth's brother, someone they trusted. If that was true, Karen's family had been woven through this case since the beginning. Laura killed the engine, stepped out, and walked up the cracked path. The air smelled faintly of iron and dust, the way it does before a storm. Karen opened the door before Laura could knock. Her eyes were red-rimmed, as if she hadn't slept. "I figured you'd come," she said. "Then you know why." Karen hesitated, then nodded. "Come inside, but we need to keep our voices down." The living room was dim, curtains drawn against the late sun. The old family photographs still lined the walls, Ruth and David, the children, Karen as a girl. Karen poured 2 glasses of water, set one in front of Laura, then sat opposite her at the kitchen table. "You've been talking to Mark Collier," Karen said flatly. "I have," Laura said. "He told me Ruth confessed to him before she died. That she wasn't the only one who knew what happened that night." Karen's hands tightened on her glass. "My Uncle John," she murmured. "You think he took them?" "I think he helped," Laura said, "and I think Ruth knew it." Karen's gaze shifted toward the hallway, as if listening for something. "You don't understand what it was like back then. Everyone thought the Whitlows were the perfect family, but behind closed doors—" Her voice trailed off. "Behind closed doors what?" Karen swallowed. "My father, John, wasn't right. After the army, something broke in him. He drank, got violent. Ruth was the only one who could calm him down." Laura watched her carefully. "He was protective of the kids?" Karen nodded slowly. "Too protective. Said he didn't trust David around them. Said he'd take them somewhere safe one day. Ruth thought he was just talking, and the night they vanished?" Karen's eyes filled. "He came home late. Mud on his boots. Wouldn't say where he'd been. When the police started asking questions, he told me to keep quiet. Said if anyone asked, we were at church. But we weren't." Laura felt the hair on her arms lift. "Where were you?" Karen's lips trembled. "In the car, waiting outside the Whitlow house. For a long moment, the only sound was the hum of the refrigerator." "Karen," Laura said softly, "what did you see?" Karen stared into her glass as if the past were reflected there. "The kids came out in their pajamas. Uncle John told them it was a surprise trip, something about the stars. They got in the back seat. Ruth stood on the porch, crying. David wasn't there. Then he drove away. Where did he take them? I don't know. He came back before dawn, told me to forget it ever happened. He said they'd gone to heaven." Laura's pulse hammered. "Did Ruth know?" Karen nodded faintly. She knew, but by the time she realized what he'd done, it was too late. My father threatened her. Said if she talked, he'd tell the police she helped, and she carried that guilt to her grave, Laura said quietly. Karen looked up, tears streaking her face. She wasn't a monster. She just couldn't bear to lose everything. Neither could he. Laura leaned forward. "Karen, I need you to be honest with me. When your father died, where were his things kept?" "In the basement," she said. "He left boxes, old uniforms, tools. I've never touched them. Show me." Karen hesitated, then stood. She led Laura down a narrow hallway to a door beside the pantry. The handle was old brass, polished smooth from years of use. She turned it slowly, revealing a flight of wooden steps descending into darkness. The air was cool, thick with the smell of oil and damp earth. Laura flicked on her flashlight. At the bottom, the basement spread out like a forgotten tomb. Shelves lined the walls, heavy with rusted cans and faded photographs. In one corner sat a workbench, its surface cluttered with tools and yellowed newspapers. Karen pointed. "Those are his boxes." Laura crouched, pulling one toward her. Inside were old army items, dog tags, a lighter, a folded uniform. Beneath them, wrapped in burlap, was a small metal tin. She opened it. Inside lay a gold locket, oval, engraved with the initials R.W. Laura's breath caught. "Ruth's locket," she whispered. Karen stared. "I thought it was buried with her." Laura lifted it, clicking it open. Inside were two small photographs, Tommy and Lila Whitlow, smiling. Beneath them, a lock of fine, pale hair. Karen sank onto the step, covering her mouth. He kept it. Laura's light caught something else at the bottom of the box, a folded piece of paper, brittle with age. She eased it open. "If anyone finds this, tell Ruth I'm sorry. I thought I could save them, but I was too late. They were already gone when I got there. He made me help bury them. He said no one would believe me if I talked. Maybe he was right." J.D. Laura's hand trembled. "He made me help bury them." "Who's he?" Karen whispered. Laura looked up slowly. "It wasn't David." Karen blinked. "Then who?" "Think, Karen," Laura said urgently. Your father said he tried to save them. The only man with the authority to control that investigation, to redirect reports, to hide files. Karen's eyes widened. Sheriff Collier. Laura nodded, the realization slamming into place. Ray Collier staged the scene, silenced witnesses, and made your father help him bury the evidence. Karen stood abruptly, shaking. Then all these years, Mark knew. The wind howled suddenly outside, rattling the basement windows. The lights flickered, then went dark. Laura's flashlight beam jumped across the walls, catching movement near the top of the stairs. A shadow. Someone was standing there. Karen? Laura whispered. But Karen was beside her, frozen. The figure turned and vanished into the dark hall above. The door creaked shut. Laura drew her sidearm, flashlight trembling in her grip. They were no longer alone. The door at the top of the stairs thudded closed, muffling the sound of the storm outside. For a long second, neither woman moved. The basement was a black box, thick with dust and silence. Laura Bennett lifted her flashlight, the beam cutting through the dark in a trembling arc. "Stay behind me," she whispered. Karen Delaney clutched the railing, breath ragged. "Who was that?" "You saw him, didn't you?" "I did." The beam found the narrow line of the door above, light seeping through the edges. Footsteps creaked across the floorboards overhead, slow, deliberate. Laura's mind raced. Whoever it was had waited until they were below. Someone who knew the house's layout, knew there was only one way out. The steps stopped directly over them. Then a voice, calm and steady. "Detective Bennett." Step away from her, Laura froze. The voice was familiar. "Mark!" she called up. No answer, just the faint metallic sound of a gun's hammer clicking back. Laura motioned to Karen, guiding her toward the far wall. "Is there another exit?" Karen shook her head. "There used to be a coal chute, behind the shelves, sealed up years ago." Laura swung the flashlight, scanning the wall. The old bricks were uneven, some crumbling with age. The voice came again, closer to the door now. "You shouldn't have come here, Detective. I told you to leave this alone." It was unmistakable this time. Mark Collier. Laura felt her stomach tighten. "You were protecting him," she said loudly. "Protecting your father." The knob rattled. "My father protected this town," Mark said through the door. "From chaos. From the truth that would have destroyed everyone." Karen shouted. "He murdered children." Silence. Then the slow sound of footsteps descending the stairs. The beam of Laura's flashlight caught his face halfway down, lined, sweat beading on his brow, revolver glinting in his hand. "Put the gun down, Mark," Laura said evenly. He shook his head. "You don't understand. You've been digging up ghosts that were buried for a reason. Your father killed them," Laura said. "He made John Delaney help. You've seen the letters." Mark's eyes flickered. "You think I don't know?" "I grew up with that secret. Watched my father drink himself to death over it. He told me the night before he died. Told me everything. Said Ruth begged him to hide it. Said David had snapped and hurt the boy. Lila tried to stop him, and then it was too late." Laura stepped closer. "That's not what the evidence says." "The evidence lies," Mark said sharply. "My father cleaned up after everyone. David, Ruth, even John. He didn't kill those kids. He buried their shame." Karen's voice trembled. "You changed the reports. You helped keep it quiet." Mark's eyes glistened. "Because the truth wouldn't bring them back. It would only ruin what little was left." He lifted the revolver, pointing it at Laura. "Walk away, Detective. Take your theories and go. Let the dead stay buried." Laura's pulse hammered. "If that's what you believed, you wouldn't be here." Mark's hand shook. "You're forcing me to do what my father couldn't." The thunder outside cracked, the sound echoing through the old wood. Laura took a slow step forward. "You don't have to repeat his sins, Mark. You said it yourself. He drank himself to death over guilt. Don't make that your inheritance." For a moment, his resolve wavered. The gun lowered slightly. Then Karen stepped from behind the shelf, shouting, "You can't kill the truth." The sound startled him. His finger jerked. The gun went off. The shot ripped through the darkness, shattering a glass jar behind Laura. She dropped to the ground, the flashlight clattering. Karen screamed. Laura rolled behind a workbench, drawing her own weapon. "Mark! Stop!" He fired again. Sparks jumped from the wall. The air filled with dust and the ringing of gunfire. Laura aimed low, squeezing once. The bullet struck the concrete near his feet. He stumbled, cursing. "Karen, go!" Laura shouted. Karen scrambled toward the back wall, fumbling at the old coal chute. One brick gave way, then another. A sliver of pale light seeped through. Laura rose, gun trained on Mark. "It's over." He shook his head, breath ragged. "It was over 60 years ago." He turned the gun toward himself. "No!" Laura lunged forward, knocking his arm aside. The revolver discharged into the ceiling. The old bulb above them exploded, plunging the basement into near blackness. When the dust settled, Mark was on his knees. The gun skittered across the floor. He looked up at Laura, tears streaking the dirt on his face. "I didn't kill them," he whispered, "but I buried them again after the drought." "I couldn't stand the thought of the world tearing them apart." All over Laura's voice softened. "You went back to the lake." He nodded weakly. "Moved what I could find. The dress, the locket. I thought if I reburied them, maybe the ghosts would stay quiet." She lowered her gun, stepping closer. "Then let them rest properly this time. Tell the truth." Mark's eyes closed. Truth doesn't rest. It just waits. By the time Morales' units arrived, rain had started to fall. A rare, heavy storm rolling over the basin. Officers led Mark out in cuffs, his head bowed. Karen sat on the steps, blanket around her shoulders, silent. Laura watched from under the porch. The air smelled of wet dust, and lightning flashed far across the horizon. Morales approached, rain dripping from his hat. "You all right?" "I've been better," Laura said. He talked. "I know," she said quietly, "but there's still something missing. The letters, the film, the confession, they all point to Collier and David. But the kids, where exactly were they buried before he moved them?" Morales frowned. He didn't say. No, he just kept repeating, "The truth waits." Later that night, back in her motel room, Laura spread the evidence across the bed. Photographs, Irene's letters, John's note, the recovered locket. The map of Hollow Creek lay beneath it all, the basin marked with red ink. Her eyes drifted to a small circle Collier's notebook had drawn years ago, just north of the arroyo. Next to it, one word, faded but legible. "Well." She looked up sharply. The old surveyor's well, the same one beneath the hut. They'd pulled the dress from it, but not what lay deeper. Outside, thunder rolled again, long and low. Laura grabbed her coat and badge. It was time to go back to the lake. Rain blurred the road into a dark, glistening thread as Laura's headlights swept through the downpour. The storm had settled heavy over Hollow Creek, washing the basin in sheets of silver light. She drove in silence, wipers thudding a slow rhythm, every mile pulling her closer to the place where it all began. The map on the passenger seat glowed faintly from the dashboard light. That word still echoed in her head. Well, by the time she reached the edge of the dried reservoir, the rain had thinned to a mist. The basin stretched out below, ghostly under flashes of lightning. Cracked earth, half-buried stones, the skeletal remains of an old dock jutting from the mud. She parked the Jeep at the ridge, pulling on a rain jacket and strapping her flashlight to her wrist. Her boots sank with every step. The smell of wet clay and metal filled her nose. When she reached the hut, the old surveyor's shed, its roof was sagging, rust streaking down the walls. Inside, the trap door still lay open, the boards dark with damp. Laura crouched, shining her light down into the shaft. Water glimmered faintly at the bottom. The wooden ladder groaned when she tested its weight. She took a deep breath and descended. The air grew colder as she climbed, the smell of algae and old wood surrounding her. Each rung creaked under her boots, water dripping from the walls. Her light flicked over slick stone, then found the ledge where, months before, the children's dress had been pulled out. She paused there, the image flashing in her mind. The blue cotton faded, the tiny buttons, the silence that had followed. Beneath her, the shaft narrowed into darkness. She climbed lower. The water at the bottom reached her knees, cold, stagnant. She swung the flashlight in slow arcs. The beam cut through the haze, catching something pale against the stone wall. It was a small metal clasp, half buried in mud. She crouched, brushing away the silt. A locket, open, corroded, its hinges barely holding. Inside, 2 tiny photographs blurred beyond recognition, but one face, faint and ghost-like, still looked up through the fog of time. Laura slipped it into a specimen bag, breath trembling. Then the light caught something else, a rectangular outline near the far wall, half covered in roots. She waded toward it, pushing through the water. The beam revealed wood, rotted boards bound with rusted nails. A small chest, maybe a toolbox once, wedged deep into the wall. Her fingers shook as she pried it free. The hinges cracked open with a low groan. Inside lay folded papers sealed in plastic sleeves, remarkably preserved. A service insignia pin, and a photograph. 2 men standing in uniform beside the Hoover Dam. Richard Whitaker, state engineer, no relation to the Whitlows. And Harold Collier. The date, written in blue ink at the bottom, August 12, 1964. Beneath it, a smaller note in a trembling hand. For honor, for family. No one must know. Laura stared at the words until her breath came unevenly. The storm above echoed faintly down the shaft, the wind moaning through the cracks. She felt suddenly that the well was alive, that it listened. She sealed the evidence and turned to climb back up. Halfway, her foot slipped. The ladder lurched. She caught herself against the wall, splashing into the cold water again. "Damn it!" she hissed, gripping the rung. Something behind her shifted. A faint sound, wood scraping against stone. She spun, flashlight beam cutting through the rippling surface. In the corner where the chest had been wedged, a hollow had opened. Water seeped into it, bubbling faintly. She moved closer. The beam steadied, and there, under the murky film, she saw it. The curve of a small skull, pale and perfect, tangled in roots. Her breath caught. Lightning flared through the opening above, illuminating the shaft for a split second. 2 forms rested in the wall, side by side, preserved by the cold earth and time's indifference. Laura stood motionless, the sound of her own heart echoing in her ears. The missing children, Robert and Lila Delaney. They had never left Hollow Creek. By the time the recovery team arrived at dawn, the rain had stopped. Gray clouds hung low, the air heavy with the scent of mud and ozone. Laura stood by the ridge, wrapped in a blanket, watching as the forensic unit lowered their equipment into the well. Detective Morales joined her, his coat soaked, eyes weary. "You were right," he said quietly. "They were here all along." Laura nodded. It wasn't just Collier or David Delaney. It was all of them. A chain of silence that lasted decades, Morales exhaled, shaking his head. "You ever wonder what drives people to keep something like that buried?" Laura looked out over the lake bed, now slick with new rain. "Fear," she said, "and the belief that truth is more dangerous than guilt." He studied her for a moment. "What about you? You're staying on the case?" "I need to see it through," she said softly. The evidence connects generations. There's more buried than bodies. Morales handed her a thermos of coffee. You know, Bennett, sometimes I think you chase ghosts more than killers. She managed a faint smile. Maybe they're the same thing. As the morning brightened, technicians lifted 2 sealed bags from the well. Reporters were already gathering at the edge of the access road, their lenses catching the gray dawn. The story would break before noon. 1964. Vanishings solved after 53 years. But Laura knew that headlines only skimmed the surface. The truth, the kind that shaped lives and haunted families, lived deeper, in letters, in choices, in silence. She looked down once more into the well, the black water now rippling under the workers' lights. Rest now, she murmured. You've waited long enough. The wind picked up, carrying the scent of rain and mud across the empty basin. Somewhere in the distance, thunder rolled again, a low, final echo fading into the morning. The sun was only beginning to rise when Laura Bennett reached the Hoover Dam. Mist hung low over the canyon, ghost-like and thin, curling around the massive concrete walls. The river below moved sluggishly, its surface reflecting the pale dawn. She parked near the old service gate, flashed her badge to the guard, and stepped out into the cool air. Somewhere deep beneath her feet, water roared through tunnels that had run since the 1930s. The evidence she'd found in the well, the photograph of the 2 men in uniform, had led her here. Richard Whitaker, state engineer. Harold Ray Collier, sheriff of Hollow Creek. 2 signatures on a maintenance report dated 2 days before the Whitlow children disappeared. That report authorized the closure of an old drainage tunnel leading directly beneath Lake Inferna. The same tunnel that, decades later, would have opened into the dry basin where the car was found. Laura walked along the perimeter, clipboard tucked under her arm. Ellen Moore met her halfway, coffee in hand, face pale from lack of sleep. Still can't believe this all ties back here, Ellen said. It started here, Laura replied. This dam is where they met. Where the cover-up began, Ellen sipped her coffee. You really think a government engineer and a small-town sheriff plotted to bury a double murder? Laura stared out across the canyon. Not plotted. Reacted. Collier needed a place to hide 2 bodies. Whitaker had the access and David Whitlow? Probably blackmailed into silence. Collier was the law, Whitaker the authority. Together they built the lie. They descended into the maintenance tunnel, flashlights cutting cones through the darkness. The air was cold, humming faintly with the vibration of rushing water. Laura's boots echoed against the wet stone. Half a mile in, they reached a sealed steel door, its bolts rusted, the padlock ancient. Ellen ran a gloved hand along the surface. This section was decommissioned in '64, she said. Never reopened. Laura pointed to the small plaque beside the door. Authorized by R. Whitaker, August 12, 1964. 2 days before the disappearance. Her throat tightened. He didn't just approve the closure, she murmured. He built their tomb. Ellen met her gaze. You think they moved the car here first? No, Laura said. The Impala was a decoy. He hid the children here before moving them to the lake. That's why Collier's notes mention the well. They used the tunnel to move the remains. Lightning flashed outside, the thunder's echo reverberating through the dam's concrete belly. Laura crouched, examining the bolts. Help me open this. Together they worked the rusted lock loose. The hinges groaned as the door gave way, stale air rolling out like breath from the past. Inside, the tunnel widened into a small chamber, an access vault lined with concrete, damp and echoing. On the floor, half submerged in stagnant water, lay an old wooden crate, stenciled faintly with government markings. Laura knelt, brushing off the grime. Inside were bundles of paperwork wrapped in wax paper, a cracked camera, and several rolled blueprints. Ellen shined her light on the lid. This is engineering archive material. Laura carefully opened one blueprint, It was a site plan for Lake Inferno's western basin, every pipeline, every maintenance tunnel mapped in precise black lines. At the bottom corner, in faded typewriter ink, approved by R. Whitaker, witness H. Collier. Beneath the signatures was a handwritten note. Transfer complete. Containment assured. Laura's stomach turned. Containment, she repeated softly. Not closure. They weren't just hiding a crime. They were making sure no one ever found what was buried under that lake. Ellen looked around the chamber uneasily. You think this was a state cover-up? Laura nodded slowly. Collier kept the town quiet. Whitaker erased the records. Everyone else just looked away. Later, in the administrative archive above the dam, Laura sat at a long metal table, spreading the recovered documents under fluorescent light. Most were dull. Construction permits, shift logs, requisition forms. But one letter caught her eye, typed on thin onion skin paper and signed by a Department of Water Resources official. Sheriff Collier, per our agreement. The incident report will be classified under Federal Project 19A. Your discretion is appreciated. Should any further remain surface, they will be considered artifacts of the reclamation period. Laura stared at it for a long moment. Then she whispered, They turned murder into paperwork. Ellen leaned against the table. So what happens now? We take it to the Attorney General, Laura said. Every file, every photo. Collier's family, Whitaker's department, they all have to answer for this. Ellen hesitated. Laura, you think the truth will make a difference after 60 years? Laura looked up, eyes dark and steady. It will, to the ones who never stopped asking. That evening, as she drove back toward Hollow Creek, the rain had eased into a fine mist. The desert glistened under the setting sun, gold light catching the puddles in the basin. She passed the old drive-in, its screen now a skeleton of metal, the letters on the marquee half gone. In her rearview mirror, she saw the reflection of the sky, orange fading into purple, and for the first time in weeks, she allowed herself to breathe. The ghosts had names now, the silence had context, and the truth, ugly, human, irreversible, was no longer buried. But as she reached the town limits, her phone buzzed. Morales again. We've got a problem, he said. You'd better get back to the station. What is it? Mark Collier. He's gone. Laura gripped the wheel tighter. Gone how? Walked out during transfer, left a note. She heard the crinkle of paper over the line, Morales reading aloud. There's one last thing you haven't found. Check the dam's north intake. That's where the truth sleeps. The line went dead. Laura stared ahead at the dark road stretching into the desert. The storm clouds were building again, thunder pulsing faintly behind the mountains. She pressed harder on the accelerator. The truth wasn't finished. Not yet. The desert night was alive with thunder. Lightning flashed across the canyon, carving white scars into the sky as Laura Bennett's Jeep wound back toward Hoover Dam. The wipers beat time against the windshield, rain hammering like a clock that had run out of hours. Mark Collier's note sat on the seat beside her, edges damp. Check the dam's north intake. That's where the truth sleeps. She reached the maintenance gate at 2 a.m. and flashed her badge to the half-asleep guard. Emergency inspection, she said. If anyone asks, log me in under Morales. The man nodded and buzzed her through. Inside, the tunnel roared with the sound of water surging beneath the concrete. Steam rose from vents, the air metallic and cold. Her flashlight beam shivered along the curved wall, catching rusted bolts, slick pipes, and a single set of wet footprints leading ahead. Mark was already here. Half a mile in, the tunnel widened into a circular chamber where the water roared down into the spillway. Mark Collier stood near the edge, coat soaked, revolver dangling loosely in one hand. You found the letter, he said, without turning. I found everything, Laura replied, voice steady over the thunder. Your father, Whitaker, the cover-up. It's over, Mark. He looked back at her, rain streaking his face. Over? You think a headline can make this right? They built their careers on that dam, on what they buried beneath it. You can still tell the truth, she said. Give the families closure. Mark's laugh was raw. Closure? That word doesn't exist for people like us. My father thought burying the past would protect me. All it did was teach me how to lie. He stepped closer to the roar of the spillway. You ever stand over something this powerful? All that pressure. One crack and the whole thing gives mark. I went down into the north intake last week, he said. Do you know what I found? The children's toys. Rusted, but still there. He left them there like offerings. I cleaned the place, made it look like maintenance debris. If I hadn't, the world would have seen what monsters we were. Lightning flashed through the high vents, bathing the chamber in white. You can still end it the right way, Laura said. Come back with me. Testify. He shook his head slowly. The right way would have been telling the truth in 1964. Mark turned toward the rushing water, eyes distant. My father always said the dam held back more than the river. He was right. He dropped the revolver into the spillway. The sound was swallowed instantly. Laura took a cautious step forward. Let's walk out together. He looked at her, a tired smile on his face. Detective, you already have everything you need. Don't let them twist it again. Then he turned and climbed the narrow service ladder up toward the catwalk that spanned the intake channel. Mark, she shouted, following, rain lashing her face. Halfway up, he stopped, gripping the railing. When they write about this, tell them the truth wasn't lost. It was thrown away. Lightning split the sky. A deafening crack followed, the sound rolling through the canyon. For a heartbeat, Laura thought he'd fallen, but when her vision cleared, he was gone. Only the echo of the storm remained. Morning. Search crews combed the canyon, helicopters circling above the churning river. No sign of Mark Collier was ever found. At the command post near the dam's base, Morales approached Laura, face drawn. Rescue team says the current would have taken him miles downstream. Laura nodded slowly. He didn't want to be found. Morales handed her a small waterproof case. They pulled this from the intake grate. Must have dropped when he climbed up. Inside was a cassette tape, label smudged but legible. Confession, R. Collier, 1972. Laura stared at it, rain dripping from her hair. After all these years, hours later, back at headquarters, she sat alone in the evidence room, the cassette player humming softly. The tape hissed, then a rough voice filled the space. Older, broken, but unmistakably Sheriff Ray Collier. If anyone finds this, I can't live with what we did. David Whitlow didn't kill those children. He found them already gone. They'd wandered to the reservoir. John Delaney tried to save them, but they slipped into the intake. When we pulled them out, they were gone. The panic, God help us, the panic made us bury them instead of telling the truth. Whitaker said it would ruin the project, the county, everyone. So we made it an accident, blamed the parents, sealed the report. I told myself I was protecting the town, but every night I see their faces. The tape clicked off. Laura sat motionless. The truth was worse and simpler than she'd imagined. No murder, only fear, pride, and the cowardice of men who'd chosen silence over shame. That evening she stood again at the edge of Lake Inferno, the wind cool now after the storm. The floodlights from the recovery site still burned, white against the gray sky. Ellen Moore joined her, holding 2 small evidence tags. We'll re-enter them together, she said. Properly this time. Laura nodded. Not as exhibits. As children. They watched as the coroner's van pulled away, tires hissing on wet ground. Ellen looked at her. You'll tell their story. Laura exhaled. Not mine to tell, but I'll make sure it's heard. She looked out over the quiet basin where rainwater pooled in shallow mirrors, reflecting the fading light. For the first time, Hollow Creek was silent for the right reasons. In the desert, nothing truly disappears. It only waits for the wind, for rain, for someone stubborn enough to keep digging. That's how Laura Bennett chose to end her report. She never said her name in the video, but everyone knew the voice. It played over a montage of aerial shots. The basin after the storm. Water pooled in the cracked earth like mirrors. The dam glinting silver in the dawn. The story of the Whitlow children became a national headline for a week. Then an internet legend. News anchors called it America's oldest unsolved case finally closed. But for Hollow Creek, closure was a quieter thing. Karen Delaney sold her house and left the town she'd never managed to escape. She gave one interview, soft-spoken, filmed in her garden at dusk. "I used to think silence kept us safe," she said. "But silence just feeds ghosts." Afterward, she disappeared from the public eye, moving north, somewhere the wind didn't carry dust from the basin. The state restored the children's graves beside their mothers. No camera crews were allowed that day, only a handful of locals and the sound of rain beginning to fall. Ellen Moore placed a small white stone between the two markers. It read simply, "Found." Records from Project 19A have since been unsealed. They confirm that on August 14, 1964, a safety failure at the northern intake drew two small bodies into the water system. Local officials, fearing the collapse of both the dam's reputation and the county's economy, altered the reports. The children's parents were accused, then released, and the story was buried. First under paper, then under time. Laura stands on the overlook above the now dry reservoir. The camera stays on her hands, scarred, steady, as she holds the rusted locket recovered from the well. "People always ask why I stay with these old cases," she says. "It isn't justice I'm chasing. Justice ends in courtrooms. Truth ends here, in the dirt, in the places everyone forgot to look." She sets the locket down on a stone ledge. The wind lifts her hair. Behind her, thunder murmurs far away. Months later, the YouTube documentary The Dust Children premieres. It opens with the same footage that began this story. A lone surveyor brushing dust off a small leather shoe, sunlight glinting off its cracked sole. But this time, the narration adds something new. When the lake gave back the shoe, it didn't just reveal a crime. It revealed a choice. The moment people decided that reputation mattered more than truth. The desert doesn't keep secrets. We do. The video ends with a dedication card. For Tommy and Lila Whitlow, 1955 to 1964, and for everyone still waiting to be found. After the broadcast, Hollow Creek didn't turn into a tourist site or a true crime shrine. The basin filled again that spring. Wildflowers crept down its slopes where nothing had grown for years. Locals said the storms changed pattern that season, as if the sky had finally broken its own silence. Ellen Moore transferred to the State Forensic Lab in Tucson. On her last day in Hollow Creek, she left a small envelope on Laura's desk. Inside was a photograph of the two of them at the dig site, tired, covered in dust, smiling faintly. On the back she'd written, "The living keep digging. The dead finally rest." Laura stayed one more week before turning in her badge. She drove out at dawn, the desert stretching endless ahead of her. In the rear-view mirror, the town was just a scatter of roofs and memory. At the county line, she pulled over and stepped out of the car. The air smelled of creosote and wet sand. The sunrise washed the land in copper and gold. She looked back once, whispering words no one would hear. Truth doesn't sink. It waits. Then she drove on. 2 children vanished in 1964. A family's arrest shocked a nation. Decades later, the desert gave them back, and with them, a reminder. The past isn't gone. It's only waiting for rain.